Well, good afternoon, everyone. With my accent and also with a name like Rusty, I can only be an American. But I have lived in the UK for the last 20 years, and so I spend a lot of my time in Europe, Middle East, and Africa. So I feel more at home actually in front of European brands than I do in America. I just got back from San Francisco yesterday, and so I spent the early part of the week enjoying the heat wave in California. And every time I go to the States these days, I'm a little bit surprised at how things have moved forward in some ways and moved backwards in others. So I am a lot more at home here among Europeans, pardon to the Americans in the crowd. You all have your fidget spinners, so if you get bored, you've got something to play with. I know it's right after lunch, so if you get sleepy, I can't help you with that. But hopefully the presentation and the fidget spinners together will be enough to keep you awake. And we're going to talk about enterprise marketing technology, which of course is very broad. So we're going to try to narrow that down and talk specifically about what we call customer context at Forrester. And don't worry if that doesn't mean anything to you. I'll give you a brief definition of it, but we're going to look at a lot of customer examples of understanding customer context and being able to personalize or contextualize an experience for a customer based on the context where he or she happens to be at any given moment in time. And my examples are going to be outside the automotive industry. So I know you've got a lot of speakers who are talking to you about automotive. Mine will be from other brands, some retail brands, some hospitality brands, and we'll look at some ideas from across the more general marketplace in terms of what marketers are doing. But let's start with the customer perspective. And it's very easy to make a blanket statement like this. We're always addressable. And as consumers, we know that. And we saw a lot in the presentations this morning about our devices and our constant connection to the internet. And by the way, on the questions this morning, by the way, if the rest of you, like I, got the question wrong about the internet because you said it was the 1990s rather than the 1980s, I answered it based on when it became available to the public, which is what the question said, and possibly a lot of you did the same. But since the 90s at least, not the 80s, we all have had access to the internet as the public, and lately we've seen that grow a lot more. Of course, Forrester does a lot of research into this idea of addressability. So I will give you a North American statistic on this one. We do a survey every year in North America which involves about 65 to 70,000 people, and we only ask 3 questions. Do you connect to the internet multiple times a day? Do you connect using multiple devices? And do you connect when you're away from home or the office, which would imply a mobile or a tablet device? And when we first started this in 2011, it was less than half the American adult population, but it's now about 3/4 of the American adult population. We also do something we call the Mobile Mind Shift Index, where on a scale of 1 to 100, we rate different geographies based on their intensity of mobile use. Anyone want to guess for the UK, since that's where we are? On a scale of 0 to 100, what would you think the mobile intensity index would be? Anyone want to guess? You can just throw a number at me. 85. See, 85. See, I'm glad you said that because a lot of people tend to think toward the high end of the 100-point scale. Now, I will admit that I think our researchers are building some headroom into the survey, but actually they rate the United States and most European countries somewhere between 28 and 35. So that's the kind of numbers we see. If you want to get into the 40s, we look at countries like Malaysia, or we look at Hong Kong or Singapore, we look at metropolitan Rio in Brazil, and there we see numbers getting into the 40s. So if we think that the UK or the US is about 30 right now, and the scale goes to 100, it's only going to get worse if you're a marketer. Of course, it's great for us as consumers, because as consumers, All of this information gives us higher buying power. And we know this. We have more choices, more options. We can literally shop from anywhere in the world. We now even have technology companies who are enabling retail brands to put up a shop front online in China and manage the logistics for getting those products to the appropriate places in China. So lots of American and European companies don't have to worry about all of the work it would take to open up an e-commerce site in China. That's done for you. And these companies act as intermediaries, and they will purchase the products from you and take care of all of the logistics and make it happen. We also know that as consumers with higher buying power, we become more value-driven. So price is no longer the most important thing. Of course, we all still like to get a good deal, so price is still an important factor. But if we have the money to spend, the overall experience, perhaps the same-day delivery or other aspects will be more important to us than the price alone. We also have gotten very comfortable with our digital devices. We like to think about that as hyper-adoption in Forrester. We're getting a lot more open as humans as we evolve to trying new things, and digital technology encourages that. Of course, with hyper-adoption comes hyper-abandonment. We're just as quick to walk away from something that doesn't work and look for something that does. If you want a good example of that, how many of you used to play Angry Birds? How many of you still do? Okay, those that don't play anymore, do you miss it? Do you even remember playing it? Do you ever remember how much time it took? No. We will very quickly move on to other things. And then finally, we, of course, are no longer as willing to believe what brands tell us, especially in their advertising. So I live outside London, but I have an office in London, not too far from here, down the Strand. And I know that if I commute on the public transport system in London for just 45 minutes, I'll be exposed in those 45 minutes to 100 to 130 ads representing 80 to 100 different products. And maybe it's because I'm getting old, but my brain just can't process that much information. And in fact, none of us can. We're at a point where now we are exposed to between 3,500 and 4,000 different advertising messages every day. And it's really hard for us to process that. And when we do, we quite often don't believe it. And that leads me to this next point. And you've probably seen this particular statistic. It's been argued widely on the internet. People say, no, come on, our attention span has not dropped because of our devices, we're better at multitasking. And all of you are in the automotive industry, and you hope people are good at multitasking with all of the devices that are going into the cars. And in fact, we are better at multitasking. And the studies do show that we will still spend about 20 minutes focused on completing a task. But what the study also shows is that every 8 seconds, we're distracted. And a stray thought will enter our heads, or something that pops up, which is visually stimulating, will take our attention away. So this study isn't trying to say that we have very short attention spans. We still have a 20-minute attention span. But every 8 seconds in that attention span, we will get distracted. So if you're a marketer, what do you do about that? How do you continue to reach customers? Well, we think it is all a matter of context, which we think is an imperative that you need to focus on now. So what is customer context? We'll talk about this definition. Context is all about understanding where the customer is at any given moment and being able to provide something that's useful, something that customer will find valuable. So it's no longer about a gimmick. A clever advertising campaign might work for a short amount of time, but it won't be sustainable in the long term. We need to think about how do we create a pull factor with the customer where they keep coming to us to engage instead of us pushing information or messages at them. And we have to make sure that if we do find a way to convey a sense of value, that we don't do that once, but we do that multiple times across the life cycle and we continue to deliver that value for as long as the customer wants to engage with us. Now, I know some of you were probably getting visually distracted and you were looking at the little poster of the guy with the surprised look on his face. That's not me trying to be clever. I actually took that photograph when I was visiting one of our customers in Ireland. If you look closely, you can see there's a door handle right beside this young man's chin. That's because on all of the doors at their world headquarters, they have put these bigger-than-life posters that represent customers. And they have put these message bubbles above the customer's head. And it's to remind everyone in the organization, not just marketing, but everyone, that there's a customer at the end of every interaction. And you should always focus on a successful outcome for that moment. This happens to be their negative moment, the WTF moment. I thought it was quite funny to see WTF on the wall of a big bank in Ireland. So I asked them how that worked out culturally, and they told me that actually it worked because the CEO didn't know what it meant. He apparently walked by this poster for 3 months thinking that WTF meant why the face, until somebody explained to him that it had another meaning, and by then it was too late. But joking aside, a lot of people at this point in my presentation think, well, okay, Rusty, you've just told me that my campaigns are dead, and my advertising is dead, and I have no way to reach the customer. And that's not at all what I'm saying. Your campaigns, whether it's a direct marketing campaign or an advertising campaign, certainly they're not dead. We will continue for some time in the future to leverage email and print and programmatic and so forth to reach our customers. But what I would tell you is your campaigns need to evolve. They need to be more consistent, like we were hearing earlier in the presentation about cross-device, how we need to be consistent across online and offline channels. And when it's online, we need to be consistent across devices. We also need to make sure we're relevant. Back to that point about customer context. At any given moment, is what we're providing to the customer useful and valuable to them in terms of what they're doing? And then finally, of course, we have to be engaging, because we've seen in the study earlier that every 8 seconds the customer will be distracted by something bright and shiny. So we have to be engaging so that we hold the attention for those 8 seconds, and then we get it for 8 more and 8 more and 8 more, so that we continue to engage. And that leads me to real-time interaction management, which we think is a successor to more traditional outbound campaign management, where we are focused on delivering an experience or utility or value at the appropriate moment in the customer life cycle. And I know these are a lot of words, and it's a very long, very Forrester-looking official definition. Don't make fun of it, I wrote it. But there are a few things in it that I think are important. That idea that it's not a message, it's not a campaign, it's not an ad, it is something valuable. The fact that it's the right moment. Even though we're talking about real-time interaction management, the definition doesn't say real-time. It's the appropriate moment. Sometimes that might be real-time because you have a limited window of opportunity to put something in front of a customer while he or she is online. But quite often it's not real-time. It's the appropriate moment for the customer and in that customer's life cycle. And the last point is the life cycle itself. You're not focused on doing this as a one-off presentation of content. You have to do it across the life cycle. So to do this well, we have defined the 5 components of real-time interaction management. And Ruben will like the first one because it's all about recognition. It's understanding across devices and across channels who the person is. Do I recognize this person explicitly and I know his or her name? Or do I at least recognize that this person has been here before, even if they are still anonymous in terms of the interaction? Then it's all a matter of understanding the context. What is going on with that customer right now? What do I know about that customer historically? If the customer has still not authenticated and I don't have that explicit ID, have I saved the history of those prior sessions where that customer has come in anonymously? What's going on in the world? You saw context earlier in the presentation from Sentience, talking about it's not just the who, it's the why. It's also what's going on around the customer. What time is it? What's the weather like? Where are they? All of those things will come into play with context. Then we have the offer, that piece of value or utility that we're going to make available. How do we roll up that information and make the best possible decision for the customer? Then, of course, we have to deliver or orchestrate. We prefer to use the term orchestrate because it's not a single channel. Quite often, you will communicate with a person across multiple devices in what for them will be one interaction or one session. But for us, because we get stuck thinking about channels, we will think about it as email versus a mobile push versus it was something in the app versus the website versus chat versus the contact center. Customer doesn't see it that way. So we need to think about orchestrating all of those necessary channels. And then finally, we have to capture what happened. And I always tell people it's not about measuring to report, it's about measuring to optimize. Because you want to optimize what you're doing with the individual in the moment. You want to optimize what you're doing with that individual over time. And then if you roll up what you're doing with all of the individuals in your customer base, you have a strategic direction that you're trying to optimize as a business. So if you put all of those together, you get recognition, context, offer, orchestration, and optimization, which is a mouthful. So I presented this at a session at Wembley not too long ago, and I said, if you want to remember it, just think about it as RC30. And of course, that led to someone tweeting that RC30 is C3PO's sexy cousin that works in marketing. So if that helps you remember it, fine. Or you can also use the long version for real-time interaction management. Again, it's recognition, context, offer, orchestration, and optimization. And again, those are a lot of words, but it's hard to do. So I talk to a lot of marketers about where they struggle, what are their big challenges. And I'll share with you three, and then I'll talk about how some customers have addressed these challenges to deliver value. So first and foremost, they tell me it's about that online and offline integration. And you can see that the example here is from an e-commerce retailer who's focused on trying to convey the same consistent experience, whether it's online, whether it's in the store, whether it's across the campaigns. And I think all of you in the automotive industry can relate to the different channels that come into play in a customer life cycle, whether you think about it as the dealership and service, or whether you think about it as the website versus programmatic versus email versus app versus what's in the car. Lots of different definitions here for what is online or what is offline or what a channel might be. The next problem that people tell me they have is trying to optimize for those cross-device interactions. And this becomes an identity issue in a lot of cases, but it also has to do with trying to differentiate ourselves in a market where customers are on the go. So too often when I talk to customers, they think of mobile as the device. And we don't think of mobile as the device. We think of mobile as the concept that the customer is on the go and has access to information wherever he or she is. So I would say stop thinking about mobile as a device and start thinking about mobile as the customer is always on the go and understanding how to bring consistency to the different touch points or devices the customer might use while he or she is mobile. And then finally, it's about transforming for real time. As I said a minute ago, it's not always real time. It's right time, and sometimes that might be real time. But with real time, it's more than just a technology problem. This is really where we see the organizational issues come into play. Marketing doesn't own all of the customer touch points. So when you talk about real time, sometimes it's going to be marketing, sometimes it's sales. Sometimes sales might be a franchise as opposed to someone inside your organization. Sometimes it's a service. Sometimes it's something operationally that might happen because of a device in the car, which is going to ring into a support center. So it's all about bringing the organization together as much as technology when we talk about real time or right time. So how do you solve this? Well, we recommend at a high level. It's impossible in a 30-minute presentation to go into all of the details here, but we think that there are two types of systems you need to think about. Systems of insight, which will be your data and your analytics and all of the systems that you use to measure and optimize, and then systems of engagement, which includes all of the content that you're developing to personalize the experiences, the automation tools that you use, and the touch points, the devices, the channel management, whether that's phone or it might be on the web or whatever the case may be. And when you're looking at systems of insight and systems of engagement, we think that there are some core areas you need to focus. As you know from looking at Scott Brinker's MarTech 5000 report, there are 5,000 technology vendors in the marketing and advertising space, which can be quite overwhelming. So we recommend that you focus on what we call the core. And the core is going to include that concept of real time or right time. It will include the concept of identity resolution. It will include being able to collect data across the customer journey and use that for insights. It's all about being able to distribute the way you do interactions to the customer's preferred touch points, and then how you optimize for continuous engagement. So if you build those components into your enterprise marketing core, we think that's the right way to go. Everyone's environment will look different. I get lots of questions about marketing solutions or marketing platforms. I don't think of any vendor's offering as a complete solution for marketing. I don't think there are solutions or platforms. I don't even call them stacks. If you buy everything that IgnitionOne offers, or let's say you go to a big vendor like Adobe or Oracle or Salesforce, you could buy everything they offer for marketing, and it would still not be the complete technology ecosystem that you need to be able to deliver your customer experiences. So I would always think about, how do I focus on the core and the technologies that would help me deliver some of those core capabilities. We're now going to look at some examples. So I'll go into 5 different brand examples, and they're going to look at those 5 core technology areas of real-time, identity resolution, the idea of journey intelligence or journey analytics, the idea of interaction distribution across channels, and of course that idea of continuous engagement. And in each of these, I'll give you a before and an after. So we'll look at before customer context, and then after taking into account customer context. So let's look at real time. And I'll give you an example I think we can all relate to with Walt Disney. So Walt Disney, of course, does lots of great ads. They are all over television telling you to bring the kids to Florida or California or France. And those ads are really, really good. They're really compelling. They pull at the heartstrings, especially when it's dark and cold in the winter, and they're helping you to plan your spring vacation. But Disney doesn't just focus on the media schedule. Disney is focusing on the customer moment. So of course they have these magic bands that you wear when you go to the park, and with the magic band you can get information about the queues for rides, and you can use them to buy food or merchandise. It can unlock your hotel room. But my point here isn't about the technology in the band. It's about Disney's philosophy for those customer moments. Disney doesn't talk about customer relationship management anymore. They talk about CMR, customer managed relationships. So if you become a Disney employee, even if you're a teenager and you're only working in the park for the summer, Disney will drum into your head, nobody owns the customer. The customer owns his or her relationship with Disney. But at any given moment, a Disney employee owns making sure that customer has a good interaction and that the customer comes away feeling positive about that moment. So they're putting metrics in place to understand the value of those moments and how do they roll up to lifetime value. And in the case of Disney, lifetime value is multi-generational. It starts when the child is little, but then if they do their job right, that child grows up, has children, and comes back. And they get to do that continuously with another generation. So they're looking at those real-time moments or right-time moments in a completely different way and putting metrics in place to try to change the way the employees at Disney look at lifetime value and profitability. Let's look at that identity resolution piece. And my example here is Pizza Hut, but it's Pizza Hut in South Korea. And as you might imagine, the fast food, sorry, I always mess up. It's not fast food if you're Pizza Hut, it's the quick service industry. So the quick service industry in South Korea is very different than here in Europe or in the States. People walk outside and literally there are thousands of food options available to them. So Pizza Hut realized that segmentation was no longer enough. So they still do classic segmentation. They still have billboards near universities with phone numbers where people can order a pizza, but they are focused more on the mobile app. So they took their segments and cranked it up a notch. So Pizza Hut in South Korea has 17,000 microsegments. And across those 17,000 microsegments, they personalize to individuals based on their behavior and their past purchases. So they understand who's ordering with the mobile app, what day of the week do they usually order, what time do they order, are they doing that on their commute, trying to get to some of that context information. If they're doing it on the commute, are they going to carry it home or do they want delivery? All of those things factor in to the kind of offers they make to these individuals that they can now recognize. Let's look at the customer journey next. So the customer journey, of course, will vary by verticals. This is another retail example, but it's Cabela's in the States. And I know a lot of you won't know Cabela's, but I put them in here because I think it's an issue that you will have with automotive, and it's not just a retail problem. Cabela's is one of those big success stories from the Western United States. A guy in Nebraska started Cabela's in the 1960s. He was tying fishing lures by hand and selling them in the post, just dropping them in envelopes and selling them. It then became a catalog business, and then he started opening these big stores where the stores became destinations in their own right. And Cabela's last year merged with Bass Pro Shops on the East Coast, and Bass Pro Shops paid $4 billion for Cabela's. So not bad, given that it started in this guy's kitchen tying fishing lures. But with these big stores, they have hunting and fishing and camping equipment. So these stores out west, if you're in Montana or Idaho, people will drive 75 to 100 miles to get to one of these stores. So when they started bringing the store online, they worried about how do you recreate that destination feel with an e-commerce property. And then knowing that a lot of people would go online and then still drive to the store, how do you create that consistency of experience? Probably a lot like what you worry about with people going online and then going to a dealership where you might not be able to control the experience. So once people get into the stores, they have these big kiosks. So you can go up to a kiosk and you can recreate your browsing session. But any products that you've looked at online that you've tagged or highlighted, it now shows you where in this big store you can go find them quickly and easily. Or someone will be available to help you if you've told them that you're going to come into the store that day because you've driven 100 miles to get there. And then Cabela's also offer experiences. So you can sign up to go camping, or you can sign up for a cooking course. And if you sign up for one of these experiences, you do that online, kind of like perhaps a test drive, and then you go and enjoy the experience in person. So they have to capture all of that data and connect the dots so that when you show up in person, there's continuity of that experience and they can continue what they delivered to you on the website. Next example is about distributing the interactions, and a good European brand that also is active in Latin America, Nivea, or Nivea if you prefer, the German company. But this example is from Brazil. And Nivea for years has sold sun cream under the slogan, "Protect Our Children," because it's an SPF 50 and you put it on your kids at the beach. But in Brazil, a couple of years ago, they decided to put an ad in women's magazines. But in this magazine, instead of putting a sample of sun cream like they used to do, they put the paper version of a Disney Magic Band. So if you look here, this magazine is perforated. If you're sitting at the beach, you can pull off the edge of the magazine. There's a chip inside there. You can wrap it around your kid's wrist, download the mobile app, and now you have a proximity app to keep an eye on your kid at the beach. If your kid wanders more than 50 meters away, your phone's going to beep and let you know that you have to keep track of them. So for Nivea, this solved a few problems. It let them see pretty quickly who is interacting with their print content. So they connected print to digital. Also, because you've downloaded the mobile app, you opt in some information, they know where you are. They now have some information about your kids as well, if you're willing to share that. And they can provide better, contextually relevant marketing to you based on combining the print with the digital. Finally, the last example here is the idea of the continuous engagement. And another retailer here, but this is Columbia Sportswear. And Columbia do great ads. They win awards in North America for their ads, and this is one they did for a down jacket, where if you bought the down jacket, you could win an adventure trip of a lifetime if you were into adventure sports. But recently, actually it's about 2 years ago now, Columbia developed this app, which is called What Not to Do in the Greater Outdoors. So Columbia's advertising campaigns for years have been based on this idea of the greater outdoors. And this app is what not to do. And I have it. I was an old Boy Scout, so I've downloaded this one. I like it. It's a knot tying app, as you probably figured out. But when you go into the app, it will give you step-by-step instructions for tying different types of knots. And they're categorized. There are fishing knots. There are sailing knots. There are camping knots. There are rock climbing knots. And of course, Columbia doesn't sell rope. So they're not trying to get you to buy rope. They're providing value to people who enjoy outdoor activities. And then if you download the app, every time you interact with the app, they pick up more information about the kind of activities that you enjoy. And they have opportunities to put the appropriate content and the appropriate products in front of you based on the activities that you're enjoying. So those 5 examples are all a bit different, but they all have some things in common. They leverage those 5 core marketing technology elements that we've been talking about, but also they realize that it's not just about the technology itself. We think there are multiple levers in a marketing technology ecosystem that would deliver customer value, and technology is just one. There's also the organization and the strategy and making sure that you can live up to that brand promise. There's all of the people and all of the processes and all of the metrics that you've put in place that are just as important as the technology in many cases. And that means you have to align your systems of insight and your systems of engagement, but you have to align them with the organization. And here in the UK, we have Shop Direct. And Shop Direct manages multiple retail brands. So they're all online. They grew out of old catalog businesses in the UK. And now you can buy fashion, electronics, home products from these different brands that are managed by Shop Direct. And when they started aligning their systems of insight and systems of engagement, they had 3 big problems. The first was management didn't understand what they were doing. They hired some really smart data scientist people who were doing great work, but because management didn't understand the value of it, their budget every year was determined by how well the Christmas sales went. So if Christmas was big, they got a great budget for the new year. If Christmas was off, their budget shrank. So they had to spend a lot of time putting metrics in place so that they could solve that problem and convince management of the business impact of what they were doing. The interesting thing about the way they did that for me is it was hard for them early on to get hard numbers. And maybe you struggle with that too. It's always sometimes hard to get the financial numbers that prove a return on investment or a return on marketing investment or incremental increases. So what they did is they started focusing on more emotional metrics. They started looking at their competition among the other big brands in the UK, and they started measuring specifically where they had had good success in the market versus the competition. That is what got the management attention even more so than the financial figures which they were then able to put on the table. The second problem that they had was just getting everyone in the organization to understand that this was part of their job. Because they were collecting all of this data, they were putting it to use to optimize the e-commerce sites. And so the marketing people thought, well, that's your job. Your e-commerce, your operations, your data science. You do your thing and I'll do mine. So bringing the organization together to stand behind it was a real challenge. And when I spoke with these guys, they said that one was even harder than the executive challenge. And it took them a couple of years to get it right. And third was a technology problem. So the first two were organizational. The third problem they had was just getting the analytics close enough to the points of decision where it would matter. So they were capturing all of this great data. They had all of these great insights in the back office, but they needed to take that closer to the front lines where it could impact the e-commerce systems and put recommendations on the e-commerce site itself and integrate with the email systems for retargeting and integrate with the programmatic side of marketing so that they could retarget with the display ads as well. So bringing the technology together was the third thing that they tackled. And then one last example for you here. You have to balance all of that with the people and the organization. Shop Direct understood that, but this example is from Accor, the hotels, but it's about the Fairmont Raffles part of the business. And Fairmont Raffles, if you're not familiar, they were a part Canadian, part Middle Eastern hotel chain that Accor acquired about 18 months ago. But Fairmont Raffles had various properties. There were the Fairmont properties and the Raffles properties, with the Raffles ones being quite luxury hotels in Asia. They also owned Swiss Hotel. So trying to market across all of those different properties was a real challenge. It was made more difficult because those organizations operated as franchises. So a lot of the people managing the hotel properties were not Fairmont Raffles hotel employees. And when I spoke with the head of CRM for Fairmont Raffles, she told me that the biggest lesson they learned is that it's only about 30% technology, and the other 70% is rolling it out effectively and getting the buy-in from all of those people out in the field who are interacting with the customers on a daily basis. And they put a big program in place where they went out and spent time with these franchisees to understand their requirements, understand what they did on a daily basis, and see what they could do to provide more value to them so that they could in turn pass that value on to the customers. Another good example of that is here in the UK. I don't have a slide on it, but Royal Bank of Scotland has a new program that they initiated about a year ago. They call it Personology. And for them, it's the blend of people and science, or that whole art and science thing that we hear about. But what they wanted to do is create a virtual organization inside the bank. So now, no matter what your job is at Royal Bank of Scotland, If you feel that you have something to contribute that will help with the customer engagement strategy, you can sign up to be a member of the personology team. So even if you're a bank teller, you can go work on the personology team for a week or a month or a quarter. And they've built this in to the development plan for the employees of the bank. And they told me they right now have so many people that have signed up. They've got about a 3-month waiting list of people that want to be part of the personology team and contribute. That's a real way to get buy-in for the technology investments that you make. They even take it to the extent that if you are working for RBS, your business card says you're a personologist. And you know, we can look at that and I see a few smiles. My reaction is a little bit the same. I don't know that I would like being a personologist. I don't need that on my business card. But don't underestimate the emotional appeal of that to a lot of employees that probably work in your organizations as well. So I'm going to close a bit early, give you some time back on the agenda so we can move on to the panel discussion. We do think that this concept of customer context and aligning the systems of insight and engagement with the organization is a real imperative. It's something that you have to do if you want to evolve and you want your marketing programs to be effective and go beyond just campaign schedules and into something that customers will embrace because it meets their requirements and provides them value. We think that if you get this right, it can start to guide the way you make both technology investments and people investments, and that will extend then to the way you make media investments. So there's a lot riding on this in terms of understanding and embracing that customer context and trying to be more personal and more contextual and more in the appropriate moment for what the customer expects to see. So with that, I'll give it back to Stefan. I think we have a panel discussion coming up, if I remember right. So thank you.